So I want to start off a little bit with talking about the concept of shame itself. And so I want to begin with this video. It's one of the videos that I absolutely love when we get to that topic of shame.
Shame is the gremlin who says, never good enough. And if you can talk it out of that one, who do you think you are? The thing to understand about shame is it's not guilt. Shame is a focus on self, guilt is a focus on behavior. Shame is I am bad, guilt is I did something bad. Shame is highly, highly correlated with addiction, depression, violence, aggression, bullying, suicide, eating disorders. And here's what you even need to know more: guilt inversely correlated with those things. Shame for women is this web of unattainable, conflicting, competing expectations about who we're supposed to be. For men, shame is not a bunch of competing, conflicting expectations. Shame is one: do not be perceived as what? Weak. But the truth is, vulnerability is not weakness. I define vulnerability as emotional risk, exposure, uncertainty. It fuels our daily lives. And I've come to the belief, this is my 12th year doing this research, that vulnerability is our most accurate measurement of courage. If we're going to find our way back to each other, we have to understand and know empathy, because empathy is the antidote to shame. If you put shame in a petri dish, it needs three things to grow exponentially: secrecy, silence, and judgment. If you put the same amount of shame in a petri dish and douse it with empathy, it can't survive. The two most powerful words when we're in struggle: me too. If we're going to find our way back to each other, vulnerability is going to be that path.
So when we think of the word shame, first thing I just want you to think of, you don't have to necessarily jot down any answers or anything, but unless you want to, feel free. But I just want you to think of, like, hearing that word shame, what first things come to mind? A lot of time we tend to hear things, or we think of things of like hiding, we think of judgment, we think of criticism, we think of darkness. There's a lot of imagery that is evoked by the word shame itself. By definition, my favorite definition comes from Dr. Brene Brown, who we just heard from. She defines it as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So she continues, where something that we've experienced, done, or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection. So in essence, shame is that feeling, that belief, that inner holding of I am bad, that something is so wrong, so broken, so messed up within me that I am incapable of having connection to another human being, to my own self, even to love, to this feeling of community, of spirituality. Um, for Shame is a universal human experience. It's something that every single person on this planet feels in some capacity, particularly within the queer community and any other marginalized community as well. We experience this on higher levels simply because of our uniqueness from what society says is the norm, or quote unquote allowed or permissive or okay. And so we get that double whammy of shame. We get the typical human experience shame, then we also get the shame of who we are. And so the work that I do tends to focus within the concept of sexual shame. So shame pertaining to our sexuality, our sexual orientation, our sexual expression. Shame itself directly correlated with anxiety, depression, loneliness, isolation, withdrawal, suicidality. Research shows gay men, not surprising probably to anybody, but gay men report significantly higher levels of sexual shame in comparison to heterosexual men. And again, a lot of it comes back to that inner belief that because of who we are, because of what we enjoy, because of how we feel, if we grew up and were raised in cultures, societies, which is the entire society that we're in, that says that this is not safe, this is not permissive, this is not okay, that message of wrongness, brokenness is going to amplify and is going to peer into every single area of our life. So how this shows up, it shows up in a lot of the ways that we talk to ourselves, a lot of the inner messaging that we have, a lot of the thoughts that play on repeat, kind of like a Rolodex in our mind all day long. So if we've ever said anything to ourselves, or we've even heard this from other people, things like, I'm not sexual enough, I'm not having enough sex, my body isn't pretty enough, my body isn't thin enough, my body isn't pretty or perfect enough, my dick isn't big enough, my dick isn't hard enough, my ass isn't strong enough. I don't make enough money. I don't travel enough. I'm not good enough in bed. If we hear any sentence that sounds like that, remotely close to it, then shame is the driving force behind it. It's that driving emotion, that driving feeling. Ultimately, what it always comes down to, it always comes back to this inner message of, I'm not enough. And so this statement, this sentence, repeated enough times, becomes a core belief that we get hooked on within our own self, that becomes so concrete, it becomes crystallized, it becomes a foundation of our way of being. And so every single action that we then take in life is stemming out of this core belief, out of this belief of, I'm not enough, I'm broken, something is wrong with me, I must be a mistake in the world. Why this matters: high levels of sexual shame strongly associated with increasing mental health challenges, particularly depression, anxiety, elevated suicidality among men of sexual minorities, uh, double the percentage of suicidality, suicide thoughts. Many gay men cope through substance abuse. This is a huge issue within our community. Internalized homophobia shows up, adds on that note as well. And all this is with the research that we have, but there's also very little research on this topic because nobody wants to talk about it and nobody wants to address it, especially within a sexual minority field. So the information that we have is minimal, but after working together with hundreds of clients over the past several years, we see a lot of similarities, a lot of trends on how shame shows up. So I wanted to share this case study, this example of a recent client that I worked together with. So this was a couple years ago. So I was working with a gentleman, and he was a nonprofit executive. So he was leaders of one of the big nonprofit agencies. And he came to me for coaching to talk about sexual performance and shame related to that. Particularly, the challenge that he was having is within his marriage. They were together about 15 years at that point. He was having a really difficult time of ejaculating when having sex with his partner. And he was finding that for himself, he was able to have sex online, like he was able to play with other people in digital spaces. He had a really great time there. Like he enjoyed it and no performance at all. But when it came to his husband, the spotlight kind of kicked in, just felt super anxious. Wasn't able to enjoy the experience at all. And even so much so to a point where he was considering leaving that relationship. He had notes that he shared with me on how he was going to divorce his partner, all these things, because that pressure was so high. As we started talking more and more about this, we arrived at his inner shame message of, I'm a bad person. For him, his message was, I'm a bad person because I can't please and I can't perform for my husband, but I'm doing so in these online spaces. And I actually feel really good about that. But because he felt good about that, and because he had that shame over here with his partner, that kept this a secret. And so it made it even more amplified. So he wasn't telling his partner about his online experiences. He wasn't sharing that with him. But then that started going against his inner wiring, his inner core values of honesty, integrity, the love that he wanted to be for his partner. So all of that incongruence led to that inner message of, I'm a bad person. That shame got so loud that for him, he believed that to be completely true. So he thought that about work. He thought I'm a bad person in the office. I'm doing a terrible job of leading this community. He thought it within his family. He's, it was like, I'm a terrible son, I'm a terrible parent, all these things. So as we started working together, we arrived at that message, and I helped him to see where he was operating out of and why, and where that was coming from. And the thing with a lot of shame work is that we want to identify what that inner message is, again, because that's the blueprint that's behind every single action that we're taking. But the way that we want to go about this is we have to be incredibly delicate and compassionate along the way. It's I say this a lot where I view it like it's like walking a tightrope. As we're exploring what our inner shame message is, we don't want to piss it off because essentially if we do, it's going to make us backpedal and it's going to activate it even stronger. But we have to start chipping away at our own belief of it if we want to make any sort of change. So it's really delicate work. But as we worked together, and we helped him to see that this is what his message was, we were able to start chipping away at it by helping him to get congruent with his actions. So helping him to see, why he was feeling that performance anxiety with his husband, why he wasn't in these online spaces. He was then able to talk about that with his partner, create those safer experiences, eventually able to then talk about his online work. For them, they talked about opening things up. Things got really beautiful, and they're still together. They're doing awesome. It's really, really cool things. But I wanted to share that because of the powerful nature of that shame messaging. When we don't see how it's taken over our life, it will be that driving force in every single area until we become aware of what it is and until we start to make some changes, some adjustments to that inner messaging. And so for me, like, this is why this work matters so much, is because it's literally life-saving. So a little bit about me myself. I have been coaching gay men, particularly within the concept of sexual shame for my whole career. I've been in the coaching mental health field for 10, 11 years, but especially over the past several years is where I've really channeled out this focus on sexual shame. Um, and I'll get to that reason why in just a little bit, but I do lots of different things. So I do one-on-one coaching sessions. I create online content. So OnlyFans, just for fans, resources there. I do courses, webinars like this, retreats. I also write on Substack. All of that from this umbrella of helping gay men through sexual shame. And the reason why is because this is also has been my story. So I grew up on a farm in rural Northwest Ohio. Farm's been in the family for like 150 years, like 5 generations. It's actually super cool. All my family is still back there. We also grew up very religious, grew up Lutheran. In our tight-knit community, there's like 1,500 people in the town that I'm from. My very first memory, I remember having a crush on a boy in my preschool class, thinking that he was really cute. And I was 3 years old. It's just very, very typical, very common of, yeah, this kid's nice to look at. I didn't think anything of it, but the older that I got, I realized pretty quickly that same-sex attraction was not allowed, not okay in my community, and not only in the community, but across the nation, kind of across the world. I remember there'd be times where our family would be sitting down for like a family meal. We'd be watching the like national news, and like state by state would be um passing like gay marriage laws. I remember like California was one, like Massachusetts might have been another. And like when that came across the news, they would show clips of couples getting married at the courthouse. And as they would kiss, like my family would get so upset. Like my dad would turn the TV off. He'd like change a channel. He would just start condemning, like this is wrong. This is terrible. Like, why are they showing this type of a thing? And so I was just absorbing all this messaging of like, oh shit, this isn't okay. But I knew already how I felt. And then I just started to get really quiet out of a safety lens where um, I was just picking up on all these cues of what was permissive and what wasn't. And that message I started taking in was, I'm not okay. I'm not allowed. I'm not welcome here. I'm not safe here. This place isn't for me. As I got older, like the only choice that I had was to leave. And so I came out, I left, family kind of fell apart. Um, didn't know where to go, what to do. I just knew that I couldn't be there. So on my own path of discovering who I was, like what that meant to be gay, had a lot of really unsafe, dangerous situations, unhealthy relationships, sexual assault, and throughout throughout all of that was also as my mental health career was starting to grow. And so I started pairing these worlds together because I needed that healing myself, but I was also helping people through it too. And so the worlds combined in a really, really quite beautiful way. And so about 6 years ago is when I started my coaching practice itself. Before that, I was a counselor, a therapist, but then I moved into coaching because I really enjoy the creative approach that we can take, where I can get super, super specific on how we talk about shame, on the tools that I use to do that, um, the the depth of support that can be provided, which is absolutely necessary for so many people. So this work has been really resonating with a lot of people, again, because shame is something that every single human experiences. Sexual shame, I would, again, research is limited, but I think a very healthy estimate of 97, 98% of gay men, experience sexual shame on some level. At minimum, it's just such an integral part of so many of our experiences, but nobody's talking about it. Been really grateful to be able to have the opportunity through diving into coaching to start talking about it more openly, creating content that provides support on shame levels. So the way that we see sexual shame often show up when it comes to gay men, it often shows up in two primary areas. The first one is like the inner, if we think of an onion, this is the most inner layer of it. So it's shame pertaining to who we are, how we identify. So this is a lot of messaging of like, I'm bad for being gay. I'm wrong for who I am. I'm wrong for being attracted to men. The shame, this feeling of brokenness, this belief of inner wrongness is on that core level of like who we are as a person. It's hitting on a spiritual level, really have the words to say like how deep down and entrenched this shame can be. And this often shows up, or first and foremost, for gay men who are brand new to exploring the topic of shame. So I work a lot with older gay men, so a lot who are 60s, 70s, 80s, um, often in long-term marriages to women. They have families, they have grandkids. And recently they're coming to terms where they've realized like, oh my God, I think I know who I am. What does that mean? What does that look like? What does that look like for my life? For folks who are again coming to terms with who they are and finding themselves for that first time, that shame often shows up as that inner message of I am bad for who I am. So it's showing up on that identity level. After we work through that layer, and or if someone has already been doing some form of personal growth work, or if they've already been aware of the concept of shame, the next level that we tend to see it, that next level outward, is shame pertaining to action. So this is more action oriented shame of like our shame pertaining to our sexual expression. So I'm bad for having sex behind my partner's back. I am wrong for being turned on by jock straps. I am bad because I like to do this thing in bed. I I'm I'm wrong because I masturbate multiple times a day, every day. It could be a lot of it could be any messaging that's related to the action that we are taking. Um, for emotional intelligence work. Dr. Brown talked about this a little bit in the video, but there's a difference between guilt and shame. So guilt is a focus on behavior, like I am bad for something that I did. Shame is a focus on self, like I myself am wrong. But there is an interesting little overlap of the two when it comes to sexual shame, where we can it's deeper than guilt. Because guilt is something that ends up being positive and it becomes helpful. It helps us to make a different choice. Uh, but sexual shame here, when it comes to like an action, is on that identity level in the sense of like for instance, maybe I'm turned on by locker rooms, and that's been a core theme of my life throughout my sexual experiences. Um, because that is something that I enjoy, something that I desire, something that feels good, I am bad because I like that. So it's still different from guilt here, but it's hitting on the fundamentals of who we are. So again, a lot of times where we see that sexual shame shows up, it shows up in these two areas, and it's coming from all of these sources. So from messages of society. So this is things that we hear politically on the news, on social media. These are things that we hear in movies and music, and books. When you're walking down the street and somebody laughs at a pride flag in the window, then that's a message that we take. This is not okay in our community, stuff like that. Um, one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest one, is upbringing and early environment. So the experiences that we have been exposed to from such a young age. So the support networks that we're around, so guardians, caregivers, um, the communities that we were raised in, so churches, extended families, relatives, uh, community groups, especially at that age when our brains are still developing and young adolescence, young adulthood, we're just sponges of soaking in the world. um, we're finding our way of survival. And so as we are picking up on these cues from our communities, where who we are might not be okay, what we might enjoy might not be allowed, we're soaking all of that in, and it's carving out these pathways in our brain of not only what do we need for survival in this space and in this world, but who we need to be in order to be that person that can be safe. Um, so what ends up happening is we end up shutting down a huge part of ourself or lots of fractured parts of ourselves. We become fractured, we become incongruent from who we know ourselves to be to who we present. And shame is that barrier that is keeping that inner voice that we know from being seen, from taking up any sort of space. So with a lot of this work, the goal is how can we get back to that inner voice, and how can we start to let that inner voice take up the space that it wants, that it deserves, because that's who we are. It's why we're here. A lot of symptoms of sexual shame that we often see. So negative self-talk, really interesting here where avoidance of intimacy or hypersexuality. So it can go either way. Lots of reasons for both of that. We also see a lot of body image challenges, perfectionism, not only within relationships, but just across the board. Guilt, anxiety around sexual desire, so performance anxiety, premature ejaculation, um, erectile dysfunction. Most of the time, erectile dysfunction is something mentally related. Um, difficulty setting boundaries, overcompensation, Um, a lot of performance compensation. So think high achievement in school, high achievement in work, high achievement in families, feelings of isolation, mental health struggles. All of these symptoms are ways that we try to make up for that inner message of I'm not good enough or something is broken within me. And so the process that I take, the very first thing that I do is going back to Brene Brown's focus on vulnerability. So through a lot of her research, she was able to see that vulnerability is the bridge that helps us to know that we are safe enough to start exploring shame. Because, like she said, shame thrives on secrecy, on staying silent, on judgment. And so it doesn't want to be spoken out. This is why like a lot of times, if somebody starts sharing something really uncomfortable with us where they're like, hey, maybe a friend texts us like, they might say like, hey, I'm $30,000 in debt. We might panic and not know how to respond to that because that's not something that socially we talk about or things like that. And so that shame there that we might feel will want to keep us quiet and want to keep them quiet. But the way that we start working through that is through that shared experience of, hey, thank you for sharing. I struggle with something similar. Um, the way that I use this, the way that I focus on that vulnerability piece is through the sharing of my own story first. This is where OnlyFans, Just for Fans, Substack gets to be really, really helpful. Is that's the initial starting point where I I come from the space of leadership, of sharing my experiences, what I've been through, the challenges that I've had, in order to help somebody see that they're not alone in that process. So as I talk through, my body challenges, that gives somebody else permission to say, hey, me too. I also experienced something similar, or my story might be different, but I felt that way. I felt that way too. When I talk about religion, when I talk about my premature ejaculation, when I talk about unhealthy relationships, it's that bridge that gives a permission for this to be a safe space to talk about it. Through the laying of that safe space, when somebody feels comfortable to start exploring their own experiences, the route that I take is we have to then find out what that shame is. We have to find it in their own language. So helping them to arrive at their inner message, helping them to see that again very delicately where it comes from makes sense. Like it makes sense that we feel this way based on what we've been exposed to, based on our communities, based on how we were raised. Like that makes sense. And also, this message isn't going to help us moving forward. It's not going to be beneficial to where you want to go, to being sexually empowered, to having the type of sex that you want to have, to having the type of relationship with our loved ones or our families or our body that we want to have. So as we start to explore what that message is, we then have to find ways that we can start to delicately replace it. So starting to find a replacement message to change what we're saying to ourselves. So these are some of my favorite questions that I'd love to ask clients as we're working through unraveling, unpacking what their shame is. So these might be even really good to jot down if you want some good like journaling questions for your own self when it comes to any shame that you might feel. A really good one, like who told you it's wrong to do this? So like who who told you it's wrong to masturbate 3 times a day? Like where did that come from? Maybe sometimes there might be a very specific voice in our head, like, oh, my first boyfriend judged me because I jacked off so much and now I've always felt criticized internally when I do it, and so I've limited myself, or I've monitored myself there, or I felt judged anytime that I would do that. Another really good question, like when did you first learn that blank is bad? Um, my ultimate favorite one here is like whose voice is that? So what's so cool with a lot of the shame messaging is that it tends to be very specific wording that we use. Um, I've had a lot of struggles with my body, with eating, ever since third grade is when it started. And the word that always came to mind was chunky. I always thought I was chunky. These ladies at church told me it. I remember we're going into like the fellowship hall one day, and I was getting like a plate of like sloppy joes and mashed potatoes, like good old fashioned, you know, farm country food, and like they pinch my cheek and like they pinch my stomach, like, oh, you're getting chunky. That was like third grade, and I still hold on to it. And so when I asked ourselves that question of like whose voice is that, that helps us to see, oh, we can directly go back to that time, but it also helps us to recognize that that message isn't ours. Like that didn't belong to me. That was something that came onto me that was imposed. Um, then lastly, like, is that thought or that belief, is that helping you to feel better? So that's a really clear question that gives us some direction and helping us to see that, like, okay, even though the things that we've been exposed to have been what they are, maybe they're not benefiting us anymore to where we want to be going. So it's starting to elicit some of that change talk there. And so this is where we then get into the replacement messaging part of it. And again, this is all super delicate work. This might be one of the most mentally delicate pieces. Again, because we don't want to piss off the shame beliefs that we have, but we also don't want to reinforce them. So I think of it as like chiseling away, kind of like creating a new sculpture, or even like murkying up the belief system that we have. So just for an example, like the one here, again, a lot of times I hear somebody say like, "Hey, like I'm wrong for being gay." Um, uh, Gently over time, I'll just start to nudge and to kind of poke around safely in that way. So it might be okay, like who told you that? Who told you that it's wrong to be gay? Um, Over time it might be something like, hey, like I see that you really love when people fully express themselves. Like, why is it okay for them to do that, but why not for you? So a lot of like curiosity based questions, but just helping us to start to open up our own perspective of, oh, okay, I might be holding on to something unfairly toward myself because I'm trying to keep that shame message intact, or it's trying to hold on for dear life. And so we just start to work with it. And it's again, ever so gentle process um, that can take, sometimes we can work through it pretty quickly, especially if we've already done some like ground laying work within our own selves. Sometimes this can be decades long process. I'm also very confident in saying that shame is something we will never ever fully get over. We will always feel it. It'll just be decreased in intensity. And in fact, there's a benefit to always feeling it because it does keep us safe at certain points. So we don't want to fully get rid of it. We just want to take the ownership back over it. Um, how I help some of the more specific things that I do, especially on the OnlyFans Just for Fans content side of things, uh, I'll do some like guided masturbation videos, sensual self-touch exercises, um, reclaiming our body practices along those lines. There's also a lot of videos that I'm working on too, of taking some of the coaching techniques that I use and bringing that into an embodied space. Uh, Creating videos on role playing out what it looks like to have a masturbation experience where we don't get off, or maybe it doesn't go according to plan, or it takes longer than we thought, or it goes much faster than we thought. There are times where, even through those videos, as I'm going through it, then I'll when my shame will kick in, I'll then actively share, this is what's going on in my head. This is the thought that's here right now. This is how I'm working through it. Um, and the reason that all of the NSFW coaching work came into it was not only was it necessary and helpful for my own healing, but it became a deeper coaching tool where in sessions with clients, clothes are always on. It's a very mental, talk-based process. But once we start talking about the body, like it can be helpful to have those examples of what this looks like. Uh, of it's one thing to talk about a guided masturbation session, and it's another thing to feel it. And so I've really been finding a fun balance in creating those two worlds. Um, and then Substack itself is another good tool where uh, it can be an extension of a lot of the coaching work. A lot of things that we talk about there can be a resource that's more practical, more digestible, and it can also be just standalone support in its own right, which is really, really, really cool.